Okay, so welcome everybody to this iHubs webinar. My name is Björn Arvidsson, and there are several of us from iHubs here to represent the organization. You will meet Erika, but there is also Magnus, Erik, Paul, and Katarina. At least maybe Anders is on board as well. So just in brief, iHubs Sweden is a collaboration platform that connects regional innovation environments and supports cross-border networks focused on specialized knowledge and optimization of value chains. And the goal is, of course, to promote system innovation and reshaping entire systems, such as energy systems, healthcare systems, or sustainable solutions. And just as a brief reflection, I think we all have been following the US election this week, and I think most of the media and everybody else is focusing on the leader who won the election. But I think it's more important and more interesting actually to look at what's behind it. What symptom is this leader a symptom for? If you look at the kind of maps they were showing during when they were calculating the votes, you could see that apart from the major cities in the United States, everything is red. Everybody is voting Republican. And that is in the rural areas. And I think the reason for that is that the people in the rural areas are left behind, so to say. They are very poor. They might be unemployed. And they are a symptom of very bad policies during several decades. And I think if we reflect on even European countries and other countries as well, going back 100 years, I would say we were in a state where we were, just kind of surviving as the human species. But the last 100 years, we have been developing very fast, but we have been developing in a positive manner, which means that we have been able to catch up all the time with the development. But now we're in a state where we're not able to catch up anymore. We have many people left behind, and we just continue to develop, or we can't stop it really. And this becomes a systemic challenge. For instance, if you look at cities, even small cities have been growing very fast, and we have created technical debts, but we also created organizational debts, might be social debts as well. And we're just rushing on forward. And to be able to turn this around, I think we really need to figure out the ecosystem and the different forces and counter forces in these systems. And as we will talk about today, we would need people who actually can manage these complex ecosystems and lead them. And we've been talking about sometimes, about herding cats and stuff like that. But sometimes it might be like that. I myself is in a system in Uppsala where I have no mandate at all, but I am supposed to drive the ecosystem forward to meet the kind of societal challenges and societal opportunities. And doing that without mandate is very difficult. So you have to earn your mandate all the time. But that is my personal view of things, and I will not go too deep into this because we have experts who will talk about this today. So with that said, I leave the floor to our moderator today, Erika, and you can take us away with the presenters that we have.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Björn. My name is Erika Tanos, and I'm the Community Manager, Learning and Community Manager of iHubs. And just to give you a little bit of background to this seminar series, which we're actually having, it's about, in general, we have been focusing on systems innovation in practice this autumn. And we're just so happy to see you here, that we're gathering around this digital campfire today to explore particularly systems leadership together with our wonderful speakers who will be sharing some wisdom drawn from their practices. And so what we have been focusing on previously was system demonstrators. This seminar has already happened, and so we have systems leadership today, and the next one is about academia as an engine for systems innovation the 12th of December. So just so you get a little overview of this seminar series. And we're also partnering with SISP, the Swedish science parks and incubators, and this is also related to the microfactory project that I was mentioning. And we also have a collaboration with the Systems Innovation Network in London, where I met well, I met Kate at the conference there previously this year. But where do we start when it comes to systems leadership? Björn mentioned some things related to also his context, but we're also finding a new vocabulary, and we need some kind of point of a starting point and a contrast with traditional leadership. Well, and that could be many things as well, of course. This is just one of the sources that I've found. This is from a research paper, and I can send you the link. We will not go into the details. But overall, a common pattern is that systems leadership is focusing on not so much fixing separate problems, but trying to understand the system as a whole and how issues are connected. It's more about constant learning, experimentation, adaptation, and identifying leverage points for interaction, or more leverage points for actually intervention. This is a little bit of a starting point. Sometimes it's also being, well, if we want to capture complexity, it's interesting to have a mental representation. So sometimes it's being portrayed as a conductor or an orchestrator. And this is, of course, just one one dimension, or just capturing some of the dimensions. Sometimes we talk about systems gardening, but we also need to visualize this role or imagine these roles in new ways. So today we have two amazing speakers, and I already mentioned Kate, who is a partner of 103 Ventures in London, who are working on designing and delivering high-impact programs that are contributing to building a sustainable and resilient society. They are also generously sharing their open source toolbox and knowledge. So this was the amazing thing when I heard Kate's presentation at the Systems Innovation Network conference in London. I thought how wonderful it would be to invite her to speak for our community, and here she is. So happy for that. And then many of you are probably in the audience are probably systems leaders without knowing it, and explorers of this relatively new perspective. So this is more about, as I said, not working on isolated projects, but between different actors in the ecosystem. And Per, who has been following our seminar series, will share his cross-sectorial journey through various systems transformations and about developing systems leader capacities in the Swedish context of the health tech longevity cluster at Epicenter. So very, very briefly, the agenda is very straightforward. After we have heard Kate Wolfenden, we will have, of course, a brief discussion, and the same after Per Söderström's presentation. So you can ask all the questions and just let us discuss these topics together. And then we will have a mentee survey, because we are very curious to know how interested you are, since we have gathered here today, in a Swedish capacity program. What is the need for having a Swedish capacity program for systems innovation and leadership when we are now talking about the skills that are needed and the conditions that are needed for systems leadership? And then we will have a brief reflection afterwards together, and Björn will share a summary and some thoughts. Okay, so without further ado, I will share the screen for Kate so she can see her presentation. Okay. Does this work?
Wonderful. It certainly does. Can everybody else see it? Brilliant. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Erica, and thank you so much, Björn. It's such a pleasure to be. Oh, wait a minute. No,
sorry,
it's just
sorry.
to the...
Yeah. I just screen issue with too many things open now.
Oh, welcome
Okay.
to my world. Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you so much, Bjorn. It was really good to be here and to have a little window into some of the great work that's happening in Sweden. So yes, my name is Kate Wolfenden, and I steward a mission of an organisation called 103 Ventures, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you today to explore the role of systems leadership, and specifically systems leadership readiness in driving the much needed transformations we need to see in this world. Next slide, please, if that's okay. But yeah, before we kick off on that topic, I thought it might be useful just to share a little bit on who on earth we are and why on earth we're here. And next slide again, please. So first up, 103 is a specialist climate action consultancy. We intervene in systems at an industry and company scale, and our mission is to become an ever-evolving and open source toolbox to intervene in those systems to be able to create positive change. Now, if you can imagine a Mary Poppins style toolbox with many tools for creating change available to anyone, then you're tuning into our mission. Next slide, please. So to give you a bit of an idea of what we mean by that, right now we have 5 tools in the toolbox, 3 that work at an industry level and 2 that work at a company or an organizational level. Now, we don't have time to talk through these in great detail today, but just to flag for you now, these tools span from preparing sector initiatives for change through deep relational and field building work to analysing and defining the systemic barriers holding back entire industries, then designing and delivering the solutions to be able to overcome them, right through to helping companies or organisations either reach net zero and beyond by developing their transformative capability as a company, or push even further into deep systems leadership, which is going to be the focus of this session today. So next slide, please. That leads us on to, actually just move through these ones. I don't have time for these ones. So this is just where we act. I'm sure you guys are familiar with these 2. So we'll go through those. Sorry. Next. If you just go on. To systems leadership. There we go. The topic that we want to talk about. Okay, so first up, what on earth is it? Well, if we were to define systems leadership, we thought it would be useful to frame systems transformation too. So a simple definition, at least for us, is that systems transformation is the act of comprehensive and often radical overhauling of an ineffective system. Now, this could be an industry, a sector, or an organization, and it's in order to be able to create lasting and large-scale positive change. So systems leadership then, and really heeding to, and we'll go into more detail, sort of what sits underneath that from Erica's almost descriptors within it. But the systems leadership in relationship to that is the leadership role organisations or clusters of them may take in creating that systems transformation, harnessing some of those characteristics we saw. Next slide, please. So if that's systems leadership, why is it so important right now? Well, as we heard from Bjorn, in the wake of such a week for global democracy and the ripple effects we're going to see from America, it goes without saying we're living in a VUCA world. We're simultaneously transgressing planetary and human boundaries at a pace not known before, leading to impacts we can't predict nor pull ourselves together to prevent. And whilst policymakers who have historically pulled us through are ever more paralysed by a divided electorate, private sector companies are experiencing an ESG backlash, and citizens are feeling ever more disempowered and disenfranchised. It's against this backdrop then that innovative approaches to systems transformation could not be more important. Each and every stakeholder and stakeholder group has got a role to play. The challenge we see at 103 though is not the willingness to become a systems leader, it's the know-how. And this is why we think it's fundamentally important right now to support key leaders to understand exactly how to contribute to systems transformation and ready themselves for the change. Next slide, please. Now, this is something we at 103 have been exploring in depth, but as we've got a bit of a short time frame today, I'm just going to dive into one example to help bring it to life. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that this example is a corporate example, specifically working with a UK-based company called the Crown Estate. But systems leadership can take many forms and adopt very similar practices for readiness across multiple organisations. That being said, we at 103 are very fascinated by a very small number of these organisations globally who are what we term the highest potential systems leaders. You may very well have them in Sweden. So as I go through this, let me know if you think that this relates to anyone within your remit. Now, these leaders are interesting because they have a significant advantage over other organisations when pursuing transformative goals. Now, this is due to having 2 very powerful characteristics. The first is agency, and the second is capacity. And it is their combined impact that makes these organizations very special. In fact, we predict there's probably less than 100 of these companies globally. So I'll use Crown Estate as an example to try and illustrate my point. The Crown Estate is a rare organisation due to its agency and capacity. First up with agency, they're privately owned. This means they do not report nor share profits with their shareholders. And also, this bit's critical for us, they have the right owners. Now, in this context, right owners enables the organisation to think long-term and invest in transformation. The Crown Estate is lucky in this respect because all their revenue surplus they earn goes back to the UK Treasury, in effect the public purse. And finally, they have an aligned organisational purpose, which focuses on investing in the long term and shared prosperity for the nation. Now, when it comes to capacity, though, this is where it gets fun. The Crown Estate own 55% of the UK seabed and out to a 12-mile radius, meaning that they will be directly responsible for enabling 40 gigawatts of the 50 gigawatts of offshore wind that the UK has to achieve achieve its net zero goals. It's also the 6th biggest landowner. So together with its close landowning networks, they could help trigger almost single-handedly a regenerative agriculture shift in the UK. Now, we started working with the leadership team at Crown as they had already done the hard work on purpose, on developing the clear understanding of their materiality and demonstrated deep strategic commitment to sustainability. But where they felt they could improve is understanding how they can harness their unique agency and capacity to contribute to something bigger than their own sustainability journey, specifically contributing towards systems transformation in the UK. But what does it take is the question they came to us with. So maybe we go to the next slide. And this is, I think, why I like this slide so much, because when people think about systems transformation, they often think about the big and bold goals, or in this case, the big colourful balloon in the sky. But what really matters when contributing to systems leadership is what happens on the inside and on the ground in order to make sure you're fully ready and informed to be able to take action. Now, to answer to that, yeah, maybe next slide, please, that would be lovely. We at 103 drilled this down to 3 critical foundations for systems leadership readiness. And number 1 is individual foundations. Here at the very start, there is a need to focus on personal as well as professional skills and competencies suitable for a complex VUCA world. These span from empathy, deep listening, and conflict resolution through to systems mapping and influencing beyond control. It's also important in the context of any organisation to ensure that all organisations take personal responsibility towards contributing to a systems enabling culture. Next slide, please. Next, and on to number 2, is company foundations, or you can think organisational foundations here. A company who comes to any of us today with ambitions to create systems transformation without having laid these solid foundations is one to be cautious of from the outset. Not because they don't have good intentions, but because these good foundations ensure these intentions don't cause avoidable, at least because we know we all have unintended consequences, but avoidable unintended consequences and damage. Now, to start, the company organisation needs a solid and aligned purpose with the proposed transformation. And that purpose needs to integrate from a strapline at the top down to strategy and objectives and incentives so the whole organisation can align under that mission. Similarly, the hard work needs to be done on knowing the current and potential impacts of the organisation, spanning nature, social and carbon, and that too be integrated from strategy through to incentives. We say this not to be pedantic, but to be aware and secure in the knowledge that companies who have course corrected to true sustainability will tend to know or be aware of the potential impacts, for better or worse, and have aligned the organisation around them, so that when they do choose to take bold action, they do so knowing that the organisation is behind them and have real clarity over the potential risks and opportunities they need to learn and adapt about along the way. Finally, or maybe next slide actually, and this one is perhaps the most critical for us before action, is systems intelligence. What we see needed here is a basic common language so everyone can understand what they're collectively embarking on. We also need to see clarity over their USPs. And what we mean by that is being clear on what each organisation can uniquely bring to contribute to systems transformation, either singularly or in combination with others. Next, and most critically, they need to know where exactly these organisations could or should intervene to have the maximum impact on the system so that they can engage in the ecosystem intelligently. Now, to underpin these pieces of systems intelligence, we recommend building the right performance management system to be able to support them. So if the results which are slower, which is often the case in transformation, they can recognise and appreciate this rather than overlook it, or worst case scenario, shut something down too soon. This works well with agile and adaptive management practices, something outside of corporate environments we're a lot better at, but inside organizations can be quite rigid. And this is because these practices help enable change in the real time and help them move more smoothly. And finally, perhaps the bit we all want to hear, making sure that we have the right pre-existing tools and frameworks around us to help us to be able to create the change. Why? Because there's been an awful lot of thought about this done already, and there are plenty of existing tools and frameworks out there to help organisations like the Crown Estate, and indeed many organisations within the ecosystem, and perhaps many of you in the room too. So the art is to get these tools embedded, upskill the team so that together with the rest of these readiness foundations, organisations are fully prepped to identify and deliver on the highest quality contribution they can do towards systems transformation in this decade. And the joy of these pre-existing tools and frameworks as well is that they, if multiple organizations are working with the same tools and frameworks, it brings us all together. Right, so next slide really speaks to how this readiness criteria might fit into a strategy. And I guess the headline here is it's not a quick fix, but it doesn't take forever either. We estimate, depending on the organization and if the organizations commit, that to get from willingness to fully primed and into some juicy high impact pilots, about a year only. Now, to help organizations ready themselves, as we described, we see it unfolding in 3 helpful phases. The first phase focuses on cracking open the willingness. Very often there are real strong leaders or advocates within an organization, but they may not be leading the organization. So we recommend focusing on the senior leadership and the board, and focusing on targeted stakeholder engagement at an individual level before one or more mindset shifting workshops to bring the whole community along. Which leads us on to the next phase, which is focusing on building solid foundations. This requires capacity building inside the organization and delivering a simplified approach to tackling systems intelligence building that is simple enough to understand and works for that organization specifically. You might find a very a complexity comfortable organization that is ready to jump in and can deal with a lot deeper analysis, or you might find one that's a little bit earlier in the journey. So the key message is to meet them where they are. Then moving on to the final third phase, what we feel here, and it's great to see your role, Erica, in that respect, building out the right supporting infrastructure we think is critical before kicking off. So that's learning practices, progressive impact measurement, things like that, in order to support and deliver one or more of these pilot strategies in a safe environment inside the organization. Now, of course, I'm leaving out here the topic of actually delivering on these strategies, as that's a whole speech in itself. But imagine for now, that's the ultimate end game that we're building capacity towards. Next slide, please, if that's okay. Now, as we don't have too much time, I decided to stop there in the actual methodology, but happy to share it if it's useful for you, and instead shift to insights of what we've learned along the way. So first off, our number one insight when approaching readying an organization for systems leadership is that it invariably requires a significant mindset shift. Now that does sound simple, but as we know from Donella Meadows, it's one of the hardest things to do. And of course, this isn't about changing one mindset for this to work. It's about a collective mindset shift that we're after. And it's also not one shift that's required, it's several. For example, from being a victim of a lack of policy, which we hear across almost all stakeholder groups, to responsibility to take action, from controlling to contributing, and from measuring results to observing and adapting. The good news is that it can be done. It might not happen that instantly, and if we're honest, it might require some leadership rearrangement, but it can be done. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so next is systems leadership needs capacity building, which is no surprise as that's the theme of this presentation. But for us, the most critical thing to remember is to meet people where they are. If we start a systems leadership journey with the level of complexity we know it needed, most organizations would find a reason to explain why it's out of scope. So we approach it by simplifying the language really strongly and balancing the tension between systemic and systematic so that almost all organizations can come on the journey. And that journey is from becoming systems aware, but not necessarily knowing what to do, to systems informed, where they're learning new skills and adapting their existing strategies, to finally the most advanced stages of readiness, where organizations do the important systems intelligence work first, so that they are truly systems transformation driven strategies. And that's the important message here, that it takes time, but progress is progress, and that's okay. Next slide. The next up is that systems leadership needs experimentation. Systems leadership will always remain a theory until it is practiced. That is why it's so important to test this new capacity in the development of strategies that can become pilots to contributing towards systems transformation. Now, with the work that we're doing with Crown Estate, we chose several strategy pilots that span different outcomes. This was for us to test the different parts of the organisation on their systems intelligence muscle, because the entire organisation needs to come across. In turn, this builds up collective capacity to understand the systemic problems, to prioritise the high impact interventions to tackle them, and ultimately choose what specific role they want to play in delivering on it. Next slide. And now finally, I wanted to touch upon measuring impact. This seems very small in comparison, but the big topics we're talking about. But for us, this is critically important because systems leadership fundamentally requires measuring and valuing things differently. And if we don't get this right, some of the highest potential interventions have the potential to fail. Now, for me to go there, it's worth mentioning it's the art of measuring systems transformation has evolved over time. And as we know, there is no right answer. And there are many iterations along the way, which are all valid. So to illustrate the point, I picked up 3 which might help us. Now, on the left-hand side here, you see the UK government's International Climate Finance Team's renowned KPI 15. This sat among 17 KPIs in total and blended a suite of measures underneath it to identify if and when transformational change was happening. This KPI was a breakthrough approach at the time, although this was several years ago. It speaks to a more traditional impact measurement methods. It's still updated as they learn more, and all grants and investments are now measured against this metric. Next up, at least notably for me, is Laudes Foundation's great work on their rubrics. As a major strategic funder in systems change, they developed a theory of change for their work, broke down the changes they wanted to see against each stakeholder group they fund or target, and identified signals for those changes in the short, medium, and long term. The key word there is signals. Now, moving forward, all grantees report against this metric, and Laudes reports against the whole thing to their funders. They also use it to learn and adapt their strategies for future funding. And finally, as one last example, and perhaps the most advanced here, is ESLA loops on the right-hand side. Now, this comes from a small company who works with major institutions like EIT Climate Kick and IUCN, and it builds upon all of the others with the same theory of change development and measuring both qualitative and quantitative evidence, but it adds the use of learning circles formed of people on the ground in the transformation to critically analyse and sense make with that evidence, to make sure we're not just reporting against metrics and are truly making sense of what is and isn't happening. Now, this level of insight has proven time and time again to provide a much deeper and much more nuanced understanding of how change happens. So understanding it as, I understand it at least, as capacity building at the same time as reporting. And it's why we recommend it as such a useful tool. Right, almost final slide. It's almost enough from me, but that's just covering what we learned. I just wanted to leave you with a bit of inspiration. So if you remember at the beginning, I mentioned those rare companies who have both agency and capacity that have the disproportionate potential to trigger systems transformation. Well, we're very interested to find them and are proposing a research and action project to be delivered over the next 2 years. We're likely going to partner with a big academic institution on it. And in this project, we plan to, 1, accurately identify them, which is actually quite harder than it looks, because if you remember, we estimate there's less than 100 of them worldwide that we think can truly create significant change or be like nodes that could trigger change within a system. Next, 2, we plan to conduct a targeted campaign to engage them and raise awareness around them to key local stakeholders. And finally, 3, capacity build with a very small cohort of true high potential systems leaders to opt in from those 100 we find. Ideally, we're looking for a maximum of just 5 to build that first cohort and take them on a journey from awareness, willingness, capacity building, and into delivery together. And when we've done it, we'll be pleased to share 5 what we hope incredibly transformative systems leadership strategies in order to be able to inspire others, then completely open source the methodology so that anyone can follow suit. Now, we're really excited about the potential of this. We're a bit busy towards the end of the year, but this is going to be my main focus for next year. So if it strikes a chord with anyone, do reach out. But yeah, I'll just go to the last slide now. So I'll stop talking, really excited to hear your thoughts and just leave you with my email, and I'll pop my LinkedIn into the chat as well, because I'm really happy to connect. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kate. So much valuable input here, and I will soon hand over this the discussion part to the audience. But I just want to say how how brilliant it is to just see your framework. It's like looking into the future. It's not just about education to understand what systems leadership is and preparing individuals, but also at the same time, of course, building a strong foundations within the organizations as you do in your processes. And you're talking about systems intelligence, all the way from education to systems intelligence to optimize delivery in different phases. So it's just something to really learn from when it comes to building readiness and a capacity program. So do we have some questions for Kate from the audience?
Hello.
Hej.
Hej.
Det finns kaffe, det är nytt.
Finns det kaffe?
And of
Yeah.
course you can both of course ask them directly and also write in the chat. It's okay to write it in Swedish as well, and I can translate.
Läget?
Hej.
Nej, det är ett webbinar men det är inte så bra.
Julia, I think you need to mute your mic. Anyone else has any questions? Or just want to touch upon something that Kate mentioned? Magnus?
Well, I do have a question about you mentioned I saw a picture about the regimes, and you saw the niche innovations affecting the regime. As you saw, you show. I often show that, and I often got the question, what do you mean about niche innovations? What's your perspective on niche innovations?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you for asking it. So we've actually just been going through the process of this with the Crown Estate as well, because what we've suggested is anytime you're working in systems transformation, you need like a base framework to be able to work with. And the two most popular, I think, are the Bacana two loops, but I find that quite abstracted, versus the multi-level perspectives. And with multi-level perspectives, what I really like about it is you can cite organizations within it, so you can actually say, okay, so where is your initiative now, and where could you move to if you had other organizations working with you, if you had other strategies to be able to shift your practice forward. So we tend to see, we've changed for it to land in the Crown Estate. So speaking on language for a moment, they have massive landscapes, so we can use landscape. So we had to change the words, but actually the one that they actually stuck with, they said, no, I really like niche, because we were saying, is it small scale innovations? What is it? And for us, niche remains small innovations and leading to clusters of innovations that would otherwise remain niche or small unless they are coordinated, so that they could then make a more significant contribution to the shift of the regime. But they would remain small and niche unless they are part of a bigger strategy. And that's how we tend to describe it. But welcome your thoughts. How do you describe it?
Well, I see that if you are looking to, I really see that we have to have some kind of many new innovations, taking care of startups, scale-ups, other companies together, really working with solutions we don't know anything about today, but is addressing the challenges you see in the landscape. So it's my perspective, how can we use really the enterprises, the companies and so on, to do that in collaboration with other parts in the society. So that's we are working with. We are trying to use to really to find that in collaboration with the public sector, for example, so we can also see how can it work. We do it in small scale, and then we see is this something we can scale in the future. So how can we really support that, and how can we collect them into, as you see, into clusters, so we can see how can that also become new kind of disruptive products or solutions in the future. So that's why I'm just to support the creativity about that. So that's how I normally explain it.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, really similar.
I also have a question about the capacity you build with the willing leaders. You said up to 5 persons.
Well, so that's just our proposed research project. So the reason why we've so it's not necessarily 5 leaders in general. Like, say for instance, the work we're doing. I'm just keep on using this case study because I've explained it. But within the Crown Estate, we are. First off, we tackled, it was their sustainability committee, so half of their board and all of their global leadership teams. So it was about 15 or 20 individuals. And we worked with them. Then we worked with the strategy and sustainability team in order to be able to develop up the right approach, stress testing it with their task forces. And then when it comes to the training, we've almost suggested a 3-level of training. So first is just general awareness and understanding of what systems thinking, systems transformation is for a whole organization. Next level down is critical skills. And we believe it's really astute beyond obviously the personal and professional capacity competencies that go into the sort of the wider professional development piece of work. There's 2 tools that we think everyone in an organization should know. It's like really good stakeholder engagement and really good systems mapping. Because if you can navigate those 2, you can make much better holistic decisions no matter where you are in the organization. And then the 3rd level down is the really deep work that's done when you're actually understanding end to end. How even do you embark upon finding the right systems intelligence to confidently make a move within a system? And then how do you learn and adapt as you go along the way? And how do you bring the organization with you? So it's a much, much deeper version. But yeah, that's how we are proposing getting an entire organization on the journey. But the 5 people was related to finding 5 organizations like the Crown Estate that fit this particular criteria, which we think is really interesting right now, and get them to work in a learning cohort together to be able to develop this practice more formally.
Well, I like it, really.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. We have a question in the chat from Patrick Hidefjell. I can read it. If you want to change the regime and enable transformation, does that not also imply changing the locus of practice from some actors to new actors in the field?
Well, if I understand it, so I would say 100%. So the work that we're doing, again, going back to sort of locating where my conversation is coming from today, we work both at an industry level and we work at an individual stakeholder level. The example we showed today was corporate, but actually within the process that we take an organization through, it's building up their systems intelligence. But in our approach, we get to this moment where it's like, okay, so now you understand the whole system. You have an understanding of where you can intervene in the system, but when you go through that process, you realize that this one action that a corporate can make means that actually you're not really going to shift the system. And there's 5 or 6 other things that need to happen, or even 500 or 600 other things that need to happen to really, truly shift the system. Part of the journey that we take them on is going on that understanding journey of building their muscles so that they don't just go, corporates are the answer. But they have, if they are the ones that have the most significant shifting potential, let's harness them, direct them, get them fully equipped to understand about how to build systems intelligence so that they can come to the table and actually develop significant change. So I would say 100%, one stakeholder isn't the answer. It will not solve our problems, but readying each of those stakeholders to understand that is a journey in its own right. And bringing them all to the table at a level playing field would be really powerful. But we're just choosing a lens today.
Great. We have some more questions coming in, and actually connected to the impact measurement. That was so interesting when we discussed it also. Katarina Shura is asking if you can elaborate more on the metrics. You mentioned that it differs a lot compared to traditional metrics, and what are the biggest differences or changes?
Oh, thank you for that, Katarina. Yeah, so it's a particularly important part for us, we think, because no matter where you are in the system, we're all invariably resource constrained. And when you're dealing with deep, complex transformational work, it takes much longer than expected. It takes paths that you don't expect. And unless you have the right cradle to be able to hold this in, within the organizational strategy, it can so easily go wrong, and I've seen it happen so many times. So I see this as so important. So just so going back to the sort of the different changes. So traditional metrics tend to be quite, let's just use corporate as an example, but I mean within an NGO, within a government, really the key message is get to quant, show me evidenceable results in X amount of time periods, especially within corporates. The average leader tenure is 5 to 7 years, whereas the large scale transformation we're dealing with is 50 to 100 years. So there's a fundamental breakdown in the way that the traditional systems work. Now, that's not to say that quantitative isn't an important way to be able to gather evidence, but it shouldn't just stop at being able to report against a set of quantitative measures because you can get to quantitative measures. It actually leads you down often the wrong path. So in those steps, the reason I wanted to show you a KPI 15 because it was very acclaimed at the time, because they tried to do the work of saying we have to, because it's the government, sit under a KPI. But underneath that one KPI that was among 17, they weighted that KPI. And then they also had measures underneath it. I think there were like 7 or 8 different measures that would be how do you tell that you're contributing towards systems change, which had that element of qualitative nature. Now that it was quite rudimentary, it was what scale of 1 to 5. For each of them, it was very objective. So it's subjective. So it was imperfect, but it was a really big step forward at the time. But you might find when you're working with organisations that that's as far as they can get. But that is still progress in comparison to traditional methods. Then moving on, Lauder's Foundation, I really like, and you can just Google it, Lauder's Foundation rubrics and their full theory of change with each stakeholder group with short, medium and long-term expressions, descriptive expressions of what it takes to be able to see a change, a signal for change within a stakeholder group is all there. And it's a really, really good resource that was done in a consultative way with all partners and stakeholders. They call their grantees partners. And I think that's a mixture of qual, it's a mixture of quant, it's working with a theory of change and testing against the theory of change so that you can learn and adapt. Then it still is quite a reporting, don't want to say burden, responsibility, but it's much more nuanced towards a systems change approach. And then finally, ESLA loops. So that's a guy called Robbie. His organisation is called Sohoy. If anybody's interested, I'm more than happy to introduce you. He came out of some of these major institutions doing the impact measurement for them. But specifically, and the one that's probably the most famous is EIT Climate Kick in their sort of development of systems innovation practices. And it was through working in those activities and their deep commitment to learning that this methodology emerged. And the difference you see with the work that is sort of KPI 15 version and Lauder's rubrics version and the Sofoy version is that it doesn't just take metrics for metrics' sake. It doesn't just say, okay, so these are the signals, and because it hits our nicely designed theory of change, then we're definitely creating change. It actually gets people on the ground, in the people that are actually in doing the transformation together, to be able to talk through, okay, so this is what we were measuring. Does it even make sense? Are we really creating change, or is that metric even relevant anymore? Really critically analysing it so that one, you're building capacity internally of the teams around the work to really understand how you create change, and 2, you're genuinely using this impact measurement and reporting to build your intelligence to move forward. So you can probably tell I'm a little bit biased towards the sort of building in the learning, but yeah, I feel like in emerging practice of systems innovation, that's the way, because it's so much more insightful. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much. It helps a lot. Thank you. Which I think we just need the correct spelling of the Lauder's Foundation, that you had in your presentation, but if you can write it in the chat, or we can just take care of that later.
Of course, also. It's loud. Oh, I've accidentally got caps lock. I'm not shouting. There you go. Lauder's Foundation. Yeah, and if you do rubrics, if you search that, it will show up, and you'll have the full theory of change with all of their signals. It's super helpful as a resource.
Thank you so much. I see that we have some more questions, but I'm thinking time-wise, if it's okay, we could start. We could let Per start with his presentation, and then we can, at the end, go back to some of the questions and discuss them, or just return to some more questions, just so that we know that we have enough time at the end. Okay, so thank you so much, Kate, for all these wonderful insights and learning from you. So we have some applause here from the audience also. So is Per ready for his presentation?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes. So, are we there?
Yes.
Good, great. So, thank you for inviting me. This is a really, really interesting group. My name is Per Söderström. I'm a member of Epicenter Innovation Hub in Stockholm. And I've been working with stuff that are sort of around the corner quite often. And my favorite, mission is to make the future come sooner. And I've been working with the Warp Institute in Sweden for that. And working with the future comes with a lot of challenges, of course. What I'm doing now, I'm working with a longevity cluster. So longevity is it's a subject that is on, in many papers, on many people's lips, and there are very, very many different ways of looking at longevity. I'm not going to go deeper into that, just saying that we've met a very good reaction to what we're doing. So we just launched a LinkedIn group a year ago, and now we have more than 800 members, and we're doing a lot of public speeches and meetups with people that are especially interested in longevity. So, and longevity is, for me, it's a great example of systems change and changes that need to be done. So we'll come back to that. I'd like to start with this, and Björn, you read my mind, you read my thoughts. This is a book by Kurt Vonnegut, which he wrote in 1952. It's called Player Piano, and player piano in Swedish is självspelande piano. This is a futuristic, quite dystopian image of what's happening in the future, and in this reality, the manufacturers, because this was an era when manufacturing was the most important thing to do. So what they did was that they could record the best workers' moves and use these for robots, so that the robots could produce just as high quality products as people. This meant that a lot of people from manufacturing didn't have a job anymore. And so they were they had to let them, and they made a group called the Reeks and the Rex. They cleaned streets, they painted houses, they did all these practical things. And then the kings in the society were the engineers, of course. And so the engineers were able to direct the society into what it wanted to be. So I think when talking about what's happening now for example, in the US, and what Björn said about people feeling left out, this is a really interesting angle that Kurt Vonnegut described in 1952. So going forward, what future do we want, and what took us here? I often think about what happened and how come we are in the situation that we are now. And I think new technology has been defined as a technology that needs itself to develop. So we had one S-curve when it comes to the steam engine, and that that happened in the 17th century or 18th century, and had a long curve of development, and then peaked, and then there was another curve that took over, and that was the one of electricity, which was changing the whole society, also changing the manufacturing process. So, and now we are into the one that was founded through the transistor, 1947. And so we're still in that S-curve. And from having radio radios that have had 4 transistors, today we have phones that have hundreds of millions of transistors, which is a development that we could never, even in our wildest fantasy, we could not think that this would happen. So what happens then is that the receding curve, the one sort of that's going out of actuality, will clash with this new curve. And so we're still on the transistor curve, but there may be a new one, which is the AI curve. So we're going to have some news there also. So this clash comes, in small projects and big projects. And I've been living in that environment for many, many years in my profession. So I've met these clashes in different ways. And this is one of the things that made me realize when I spoke to Erika about this, that I'd actually been part of need of systems innovation. And some of it has happened, and some of them are still doing resisting. As an example of things that I've been doing, I was part of developing the Duo app, which is the app used for På spåret, a very popular TV program, if you don't know it. And so people are saying that people are not going to want to sit and look at their phone at the same time that they're looking at television. And that was sort of the general picture of what we would be doing in front of televisions. And that was like, in the 2000s somewhere, 2005. I was involved in the development of the TV series Solsidan. And when we tried to find some collaboration with that production, people were saying that, Felix Herngren is not good at doing TV productions, so we don't want to be part of that. Those are the type of clashes that we've made. Another one, which is bigger, is the digital marketing development. I've been working with marketing all my professional life, basically, and I was part of the Stockholm Marketing Association board. And when we started talking about IT and tech for maybe 15 years ago, people were saying that that's never going to happen. So we had a huge clash there, and things have changed. So things that I've been thinking about, which are on this this S-curve, is, for example, let's start from the beginning, from the bottom, longevity. It hasn't reached the clash yet, and it's very, very early stages before making a breakthrough and being able to change something from within the system. EHDS, the new rules for sharing patient data in Europe, is in the clash area, and it's happening. And it will happen, it will be developed, but in a way, we are going to meet a lot of resistance. And then highest up here, we have AI, of course. It sailed past everything else and just sort of changed things, and still changing things. And that's one of the reasons I think maybe AI should be a new S-curve to see, what is happening. But they went past every other developing projects and have been able to establish themselves. So the question is, will this go slow? Will it go fast? I think one way of looking at it is that things seem to go slow in the beginning, and then all of a sudden things just change overnight. So the fact that things are not happening now does not mean that they are important, and you know that better than I do. So a couple of words about longevity and why this is sort of a systems innovation issue. And that's the fact that when talking about longevity, we talk about increased health span, not necessarily living to 200 years, but increased number of years that you are healthy. And that's really important, because when we talk about longevity, the general reaction will be that, well, I don't want to get old and sick. And the whole thing with longevity is that we want to increase the healthy number of years in our lives, and also have the objective to make the sick part of your life a smaller share of it. So fewer percentage of your life should be in bad health. So the implications of what this is, because it's already happening. I often say tell a story about my father. He was born in 1925, and when you were born then, you would expect to have a life about 65 or 66, 67 years old. He reached 84, so he got nearly 20 years of actual increased lifespan. And if we think ourselves, how long have I thought that I would live? Maybe we should add 10 years to that expectancy. We have a terrible population pyramid where we don't have enough births to be able to support this type of society that we have. And that is a situation that seems to be coming in all major countries. There will be a healthcare system overload, not the least, due to the fact that people are living longer. And so how does that fit into this change of system? We have the pension systems. How will we be able to make sure and promise our children that, yes, you will have a pension, but that needs to be, I think the system there needs to be adapted also. If we live 1 year longer and work 1 year longer, there is a large effect on GDP. And so talking about, we should work until we're 65 or 67, that's a secondary question. I mean, we could finance the development necessary if we could work 1 year more and another. We're bad at preventative care. We only put 3% of healthcare costs into preventative care, and the rest goes into handling diseases. There's a lopsided system there. Education system. I heard when I was part of Dagar om lagar yesterday or the day before, there was a person say that, okay, well, these things are happening. We will have a different way of sharing our facts, our health data. And so who will be educating the future health workers? Because they're going to meet something that is very different. And so this is sort of there will be a lag between, when we decide what we're going to do and we're going to be able to change the education system. One very promising area is biomarkers of aging. How can you see the biological age and not only the number of years? And important to know, so there are billions of US dollars that go into research from Silicon Valley about longevity. And it's not just the crazy billionaires. There are really serious scientific projects that are going on. So I think longevity needs a systems approach, and we need a narrative so that we have a more flexible way of understanding aging and the implications both for the individuals and also for society. I had some fun preparing this speech, looking at where are the longevity stakeholders. And the first thing I saw was, I need to zoom out. And we have a number of organizations, companies, and individuals that will be affected by longer lives. And so what will their role be? And I already mentioned the pension system. I mentioned the healthcare system. I didn't mention life insurance and health insurance, but those will obviously be part of longer healthy lives. So there are a lot of areas that will be affected, and my question is, which ones should we try to attract in working with a project like this so that we can make real change? I don't have the answer. I'd like to discuss that later. One area which is obviously going to affect all the stakeholders is AI. Everything from fall detection in elderly homes to how you can fold proteins to create new medicines. So AI is not one thing, it's thousands and thousands of applications that will be able to be used in longevity. So just putting some ideas forward, I mean, we think within our cluster, we will want to work with health tech developers. We will want to work with investors. We will want to work with insurance companies. We will obviously have to work with E-hälsomyndigheten, with WHO, EU, life science research. So there are a lot of parts there that will be what we should activate. And the question is which ones and how. So, I mean, there are a couple of ways looking at this. We could in this cluster, we could focus on preventative care. I mean, there's a lot of potential there. And maybe we need a branch that focuses on longevity biotech, which is life science, very advanced life science. So, which part should we be looking at? And then we could also look at another from another angle. We could look at how can we work with children and young adults so that they are ready to be part of this system. How will we be educating even the primary school pupils on what does life look like? Should we have one career? Should we have 2, 3, 4, 5 careers? And what are the opportunities that come with longer lives? So, I mean, this is sort of a signal. The Economist last week had a piece about aging. And first, it started out with Ozempic, the drug that is developed for diabetics, but now also and maybe majorly used for obesity. And obesity has been characterized as a disease now. So the FDA has characterized obesity as a disease. And so for diseases, you have medicines. And this one works. However, there are other use cases where it may actually affect the aging project. So we don't know yet. So it's a really good piece from an economist that looks at what do we want to do and could we solve Alzheimer's? Could we solve diabetes? Could we solve a lot of other things that are important for longer healthy lives? So yeah, focus on youth. How would we do that? Instead of looking at aging population, how should we prepare the young to be part of a society that is different? Because if we convince the elderly that this is a new way to look, we have to have the young with us. They have to sort of push for this type of development. So back to the question of what future do we want, and we have seen that the image that Kurt Vonnegut put 1952 is comparable to some of the things that we're seeing today. So what future do we want, and what systemic changes do we need, and which stakeholders will take part in that development? So, thank you. I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Per, and some applause from the audience also. I find it so interesting to see how you have been through these systems, many different forms of system transformations, and the kind of disbelief in the beginning of when something is changing, there is resistance. And it's such a complex landscape as we're seeing, as you have been, painting here for us. And also the understanding that we talked about, you and me, that it's not about these separated issues and projects anymore. And this is what your real experience shows in all this, that it's about seeing, as Kate was saying also, to map the actors, as you have been doing here, and stakeholder engagement. It seems to be really key in systems leadership and how you make sense of the system, to understand the system, as we have been talking about. But also you mentioned new forms of narratives, like shifting the focus from the elderly to youth, for instance. This is also something significant, that we have to have that kind of flexibility in understanding.
Yeah, and I'd like to add in, I don't know if I said that, but I have not been aware that I've been working with systems innovation. So when I found that, wow, this is what I've been doing, and I want to do more of it.
This is why we invited you. I think there can be more people who are in that position right now. They're just discovering it. And the question is what capacities that we need to do the kind of amazing work that you have been doing.
And more tools. Kate,
yes.
I love your part of, how we can make things change.
Okay, so questions from the audience. Jonas in the chat has been kindly giving some background to the demographics in Sweden, also to elaborate on that. And I guess we have that common in most of our Western countries today. And
I actually started asking AI about loads of different countries and making a graph of it, but I didn't manage to get it done in Python before this session was over. But it's interesting.
Yeah, and we had at Epicenter, we had a visit from the government of Ghana 2 weeks ago. And before I met them, I sort of looked up, what does their aging pyramid look like? And it's like perfect. They have like the school example of population pyramid, whereas ours looks like a snowball that's about to melt.
Yeah, but I also think it's interesting to see that, talking about the election to start with, we've been so anti-immigrant in the Western world lately, but Sweden is actually doing okay because of the immigration. But I also worked a lot in Nigeria, and I've seen those pyramids where Nigeria will probably be the third biggest biggest country in the world concerning population in 2030 or something. They have so many people. They have the opposite problem. They have to get employment for all the young people that is in the lower part of the pyramid.
Yes, and I suppose that their focus would be not everybody living longer, but creating health as you grow older. That's probably a more important focus than trying to expand in the number of lives that are people will live. Yeah, interesting.
Any more comments or questions from the audience? Something you're curious about? Or reflections from your own journeys or challenges that you have been facing? Because this is also, as we're learning, all of us are learners in this. Oh, there was another question to Kate. Let's see. You mentioned that agency and capacity are required to drive systems transformation. Do you see any patterns in what triggers the development of these capabilities from an organizational perspective, and how they can be consciously built up?
Oh, that's a great question. So first off, I was recognizing as I was going through it. So what I probably need to frame, so systems leadership is its own skill in its own right. And then, which I think your characteristics showed really well, Erica, And then particular high potential systems leaders, at least from the corporate perspective, are the ones that we were particularly interested in, which had agency and capacity. Now, some of that, let's say, how would they evolve towards that? Because they're very specific characteristics that enable true systems leadership to really flourish. Some of it potentially is beyond their reach. So as an example, if we were to go down to be able to build, but some of it, I mean, if you're thinking about long-term strategy for an organization, most organizations, like an example, are publicly listed. And if you're publicly listed, then you're bound by fiduciary, what you are anyway, as a legally formed company. But moreover, that you are bound by your shareholders, and the financial sector at the moment is experiencing extreme ESG backlash, or at least extreme volatility, because we've had a little dip after the massive outflows last year. Let's see after this election this week. Anyway, I'm digressing. But yes, so from the agency perspective, being able to be privately owned is a precious thing. So being privately owned, but not just privately owned, but privately owned by the right owners, because you could be privately owned by a luxury goods company, which isn't going to get you very far. You could be privately owned by a very short-sighted family office, which won't get you very far. So it's really making sure that that ownership 100% understands that we're living in a polycrisis and that we need to be able to respond to that in an expansive way. And that takes long-term investment into transformations, and that they are personally responsible as a key stakeholder in the sector. So that's one part. So I think in terms of how would you evolve towards that, it's there have been cases where people delist from the stock exchange because they're in the fortunate position to do so, and I champion that. Our hopes of being able to advocate with investors in this, at least in this decade, who knows what unpredictable world we live in moving forward, but at least in this decade, I don't think we'd be able to advocate for publicly listed more long-term transformational investing organizations unless there was a strong commercial gain for them. But then on the other side, on capacity, so that's agency, and then that's capacity. That would, so as an example, the reason why we really like Crown Estate so much is because they have a very unique role within the UK. There is, within many aspects of the big systemic shifts we need to see, they can, either with themselves or with their very, very close network, trigger a tipping point just from their capacity. So if I was trying to think about how would you evolve that over time, I would say strategic acquisition would be a way forward, that you could actually notice that you're near a tipping point. So I'd say strategic acquisition and strategic partnership, but really deep strategic partnership, because it would be that once you do your systems intelligence building, let's say you represent 2% of a market and you recognize, oh, there's no way that I could strategically acquire to be able to get to that tipping point. Then it's like, okay, so how do I know who exactly is responsible to be able to get that tipping point together? And let's bring us together and let's make sure we all go on that journey together. Because if we can all arrive at the same page and truly understand how to change a system and that they're aligned enough to be able to do so, then fantastic. The challenge being that very often when you go to these tipping point moments within a system where you can create a change, there might be an organization that's privately owned or part state owned that has that 2%. And then you look around your peers and they're sadly not governed in the same way. So you immediately come into this sort of, which is why we're so fascinated by these organizations that single-handedly have the tipping points, because invariably the private sector is publicly listed, and it creates an immediate barrier to creating the change we need to see. Is that helpful?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, really helpful, and thank you for that answer. It was me asking it in the chat, and I actually have a follow-up on that, because you showed on one slide that we have an let's call it overly belief in that policy will fix the problem. But on the other hand, I guess policy and governmental policies and actions also is an important part of the mix. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe this is an open question, but I guess you advocate for example, public-private partnerships in this case, that could be really effective. Is that correct?
100%, yeah. So I think this sort of, if I was sort of cascading down the argument, it's recognizing that we're now where we are. in terms of being able to make change. We had the biggest election here in history. This year, we've seen a significant shift to the right. Not saying that always in the case of right-leaning governments, but when they are quite far right, they don't tend to have the same long-term ambitions and investment into some of the fundamental pieces that we treasure as from a systems innovation perspective. So it becomes quite a difficult environment, and even if you do, there will when you have quite far right or right leaning, or I don't want to say sorry, far right leaning or far left leaning governments. Let's level this out. It's ever more divided. So therefore, when you are the policy makers, it's incredibly difficult. When you're in a multi-party democratic system, at least, which I'm speaking for at the moment, to be able to make policy that's bold enough, because if you do it, then you'll get voted out in 4 years or 5 years, depending on where you are in the world, or 3 years. So it becomes a challenge to be able to get there. And I don't know whether you've seen the news this morning, but the COP president today was being secretly filmed negotiating oil and gas deals. So we're in a situation where the big diplomatic efforts aren't working either. And that's not to say that we can't rely on it, but my personal sort of window in on this is how can we get systems leaders to be able to galvanize stakeholders, to be able to evidence what's possible, show what's willing, so that, and that can be through public-private sector partnerships as well, but to be able to increase confidence, that cross-party confidence, that this is the right move to make in the long term. Because if we can get to that sort of evidence that, yes, if you do make this decision and if you do make these investments, that both sides of the political spectrum would find that this is a comfortable place to play, then you're winning. Otherwise, yes, there are many other mechanisms like policy sandboxing with progressive sub-regional governments. So you might have, within the context of the US at the moment, I would be going, right, so what can I do with New York? What can I do with Oregon? What can I do with California? What policy sandboxing can we do at a regional level? And what does it mean to be able to cluster those organizations together to be able to make at least a shift when they've got the whole system above them that is pushing back now from the Senate, from the Supreme Court, from everything. So yeah, there are multiple mechanisms, I think, and I'm not discounting policy in any way, shape or form. And if the more partnership we have, the better. But wait, so yeah, I'm going to stop talking. I'm rambling.
Thank you so much for this, Kate. So I will hand over to Björn to have some final reflections, if that's okay.
So thank you, Erika, and warm thank you to Kate and Per, and thanks to everybody who answered the Menti. Per asked us, what future do we want? And I think that how do we change the minds of organizations, and how do we change the system stuck in their own path dependency today, following the predictable and most probably wrong path? And we all know that doing more in such systems only strengthen the negative aspects of them. So we need to do things and approach things much more differently. And also Per came into paradigms, I would say. So what paradigm and what societal changes are necessary to approach with systems thinkings and systems leadership? I think there's a balance, or we need to go for two different dimensions here. First, the understanding, of course, and then the maneuverability to be able to activate ourselves. Kate talked about the readiness for this, which is part of that, and it's not a quick fix, and we need to go from willingness to impact. There are some things here. It's about the commonalities. It's about capacity. It's about valuing things differently and prioritize, and it's about the mind shift and also to be bold enough to experiment. And we need to do this in learning circles to analyze and change ask ourselves what's really make the sense of it. So again, what future do we want? What took us here, as Per said, and which stakeholders needs to take part in the development? With that, thank you.